Hey guys, how's it going, Companion? So it's kind of about time where enough time has passed to where people have a decent understanding of what's going on post Blackrock Mountain, and I thought it'd be pretty interesting to summarize a lot of my thoughts along with a pretty interesting Reddit post that I found. This Reddit post, the author was Jay Balls, and he took the time to survey. Eventually, it got up to 1,678 people. And a lot of the things that he asked had to do with, what cards are you guys playing? What do you think of the decks? And we'll go over all the stuff here, and you guys will see. Yes, it is a survey that is based on Reddit, so it is skewed to that population, but I feel like most people who play the game either play it on a very informed level and do participate in the community, Reddit, other places, that kind of stuff, or they just play Hearthstone and they see what's good and then they basically use that anyway. So I think it's fairly representative, whereas generally in most cases surveying a community is often going to be isolated. I don't think this is the case. So I think they got some pretty decent stats, but most of it has to do with constructed stuff. And basically, I'm gonna do filling in the blanks for the arena stuff, along with some interesting thoughts. So let's kick it off here. So the main three charts that they have for constructed is. What people think the strongest class is, and most people answer warrior, warlock, and hunter. And if you've played a lot of ladder, I think it's difficult to disagree. Some people they go with druid, they go with mage, and that's fairly understandable. Most people are saying this because these are basically the three decks that are, one, very powerful, but two, very cheap to make. So the current Grim Patron Warrior has taken off, and it's absolutely ridiculous. It's basically a stalling and then combo, often OTK type of deck that's basically taken the ladder by storm, and it's kind of cool deck. Some people hate it, but I don't really hate it too much. But it is a very cost-effective deck, and it is one that has some pretty fast games. And then you have Hunter, of course. You build a cheap decks with like no cards, and you go face, so it's effective and it's very, very popular and very frustrating to play against, and I feel it's still the dominant class just because it forces people to play a certain way. There's very few people that build decks and it's like, yeah, this deck is terrible against Hunter, but it's good enough to play anyway. It doesn't really get down to that. So I feel it's still, even though the Grim Patron Warrior is a huge deal in ladder right now, it is the most voted one on the most strongest class that they play. It's close. It's close. Hunter does seem to have maybe even more impact. Then they have Warlock. Warlock, most people these days are playing Zoo decks or like demon-ish hybrid decks. There's quite a lot of flexibility with Warlocks, but a lot of it is still very cheap. You can play a Zoo deck very cost effectively, and it is very strong, and this is largely thanks to the addition of Imp Gang Boss. Zoo was almost good enough, and now it's good enough. So it's it just takes a little bit to get where it is, and Blackrock kind of did that. It improved things a little bit, but the subtle changes can often have big effects. The second charts, it's what they think the strongest class when played, and it goes to archetypes. So. Not much of a surprise. Aggro and combo are the big ones. People are referring to combo as like Freeze Mage, and basically Grim Patron Warrior is a big one, and also like some of the rogue decks, which are basically always going to be combo decks. But it's Grim Patron Warrior and a little bit of Freeze Mage, but it's basically just Grim Patron Warrior. So that's not much of a surprise because both. Oh, and of course combo Druid. What am I thinking? Okay, right. So all these decks just have fairly fast games. They're fairly tough to beat with whatever. They basically have a chance to beat basically anything. And you just, you play out these decks. If you play them perfectly, you can just do well on ladder. So it's not much of a surprise that is what's ruling ladder these days, rather than maybe that Dragon Paladin that you hoped to build. Nope, it's not that, not this time. And then last question, do they think the strongest archetype or combination requires a nerf? 28% decides to nerf. I don't really know what the statistic really implies. I think there's always a population out there that don't really approve of what the best deck is, so they don't play it, so they think it should be nerfed. And I think I think we're not quite there yet. I think a lot of the cards that should be nerfed are way overdue from the GVG expansion on a personal level. Um, to further some of the constructed research from the survey, they have strongest class and archetype by rank divided up a little bit, and it shows how in the earlier ranks Face Hunter seems more dominant, largely because a lot of people play like kind of funsy decks still in the lower ranks, and Face Hunter is basically what punishes that. It's like, you know, you make a cool deck, it's, oh man, it's going to be so cool to play this combination of cards. Hunter, Hunter, Hunter. Fuck Hunters, right? So I get it. Grim Patron Warrior is similar to Hunter in the way that it's cheap, it's very aggressive, and often you have very unfair losses, but it seems like there's a lot more trade-off. The control decks don't get completely stomped by it. So, yeah, I can understand that. And at higher ranks, Grim Patron Warrior, when played well, is much better than Grim Patron Warrior played mediocre. So that seems to go into full swing, and everybody agrees Grim Patron Warrior is the shits these days. So that's pretty cool. I don't really mind that. Also, a very interesting thing before we get into the arena bucket, we'll go over the frequency of cards that people have in an active deck. So card frequency, here we have Emperor Tharson at the top of the list. Not much of a surprise, but the percentage is pretty crazy. So 95% of people surveyed have Emperor Tharson in one of their active decks. That's pretty crazy. Imp Gang Boss basically means that quite a lot of people have an active Zoo deck, because it's just, again, very cheap to make one. And similar, you see the Grim Patron, you see the Quick Shot. Flame Waker seems pretty high up there. The Mage deck is also pretty easy to build and somewhat effective. Now, when you start going through the list, the surprises are the legendaries. So you have like Chromagus at 48, you have Nefarian at 36, which is hilarious because I thought nobody would actually play these cards. But basically, if you see the Dragon Consort at 50%, it basically means that half the people surveyed have some sort of Paladin Dragon deck that they think they're going to play, but trust me, they're not really playing much of, because that deck hasn't really worked out too well, and that is the deck that is the host of all these crappy dragons in most cases. Some of the other dragon classes have worked out actually better than Paladin, but they're still in the obscure stage, haven't really blown up on one side, largely because they require more dust or more card investment, let's say. Now, when we scroll down all the way to the bottom of the list, we see the real losers of Blackrock Mountain and who they belong to. So we see that Majordomo Ezekias is actually not the least played card. It is, in fact, Core Rager. I kind of expected this card to be a piece of crap. Others thought it'd be amazing. Yeah, it turns out it's not so great. It's not so great because Hunter is still extremely strong, and it just doesn't work. Like, you often need to save some situational cards, some end burst cards, rather than just a beast dude. So it's a little clunky. I thought maybe people would run it one of in a deck, maybe. Some people thought it'd be like an automatic two of, which I think is a little crazy. This card's not too bad in Arena, but we'll get to that in a second. But man, worse than Majordomo in terms of popularity. How about that? As far as the other real losers, we kind of expected Revenge to be terrible. But man, Dragon Breath, 4%. Holy cow. This has seen some fit in some wild mage decks, let's say. But overall, the card has been extremely unimpressive. The mechanic of when a creature dies, making the card cost one less, really isn't as strong as a lot of people had thought, including myself. I thought the mechanic would be a lot stronger, and as a result, Dragon Breath is basically a garbage Frostbolt in just about every case. And then we have slightly more used Axe Flingers and Dragon Eggs, which really kind of surprised me as well. Those cards also really suck. Those are two cards I've also really tried to put in decks without any success so far. But then we move into cards that are actually pretty decent. You know, the Crusher, the Lumbers, and it goes up the list. It's basically the mid-range. So basically what we see is Blackrock introduced a decent number of fairly good cards. Most of the stuff has been just the different options. The main thing that's exploded since Blackrock Mountain's release is combo decks. That's largely thanks to Emperor Tharsum, but also, the cards that support the combo or that enable the combos, like Grim Patron, are just a bit easier to use. So I think that's overall a pretty cool thing. I actually like combo decks. I think they're fairly difficult to play, and I think they're just kind of cool. Even back in the day when we saw Miracle Rogue after Miracle Rogue after Miracle Rogue, I thought it was a pretty cool deck. I know some people really disagreed with that, but from my limited time playing Constructed, I was quite happy seeing the deck, especially on the other side of the board. As far as Arena, the same players that were surveyed and Constructed were surveyed on similar things in Arena. First thing is, most of my Arena games have been on this class: Mage, Paladin, maybe Priest, and then nothing. So, it's kind of obvious. In Arena struggles from the class imbalance. Most classes are very close to one another, but when you're offered with just a straight up better option, like it's just more likely you're going to get a good mage deck than a warrior deck. That's just the case. So when you see mage, it's easier to play, it's easier to make a deck, people are going to pick mage. There's not much surprise in that. This really hasn't changed much with Blackrock Mountain, and people kind of agree with that. In the second chart, people show just a crazy majority. Basically, 3 out of 4 people believe mage is the strongest class in Arena. I'd actually say it's about tied with Paladin, but Paladin is basically the only other represented class in that chart. So basically, not much has really changed the way people see it, but I think people aren't really seeing things the same way that I do. Does the strongest class need a nerf? Does Mage need a nerf? Yeah, okay, I can see Mage being nerfed, but I don't actually see Blizzard implementing the ways they actually need to nerf Mage. Mage is strong in Arena because of the base cards, not because of the cards that they got or that they've gotten in the past. Those cards are actually not very good, as I'll go over here in a second. And to really nerf Mage, you'd have to basically make Flame Strike a rare, you'd have to make Fireball a rare. And that's just not happening. Like, there's no way Blizzard is going to mess with that at this point. If they would have done it, if they would have seen it, they would have just done it by now. And they haven't done it by now. So that's not going to change. And Blackrock kind of affects this a little bit here. Before we get into the details, another more detailed breakdown of the votes here. So Mage is basically the best at every rank. Paladin is basically the best at every rank, except for people who go 0-2 as their best, I believe. And then it's tied with Rogue. So that's a little bit interesting there. Now, the way that I see it is that, yes, Mage is really strong in Arena, but did it really get better? Did it? I made a little bit of a chart here so you guys can see. I put the ones who benefited the most to the ones that I think benefited the least. And I'll go over that. So I think actually Warlock benefited the most from Blackrock Mountain Arena. They got an extremely good card. They got Imp Gang Boss, but not only is it a good card, but it's a common. And getting a common that's really good is just fantastic. It is the best possible thing. It's basically why Mage is overpowered in Arena. And Warlock needed a really strong 3-drop, and it got it in the form of Imp Gang Boss. And not only is it a good common, it is the best common. There is no better common or base card that Warlocks can choose from, so they just got the best one. And sometimes you see Warlocks with like 3 or 4 of these, and we know from Constructed that just a little bit better card quality has pushed Zoo back into the meta immediately. Well, it's done exactly the same in Arena. Also, Demon Wrath is a decent card. It's above average. It gives Warlocks more options for board clears, which is really their only weakness in Arena. And one thing that you kind of maybe wonder is, how have games changed? Now, not enough cards have really been introduced. Not enough impactful cards have been introduced in Arena. But I feel that the game is just very slightly slower than it was in GVG. A lot of the cards that they added kind of complement, the mid game and the late game, like Draken Crusher is one of the big ones that makes it so people can have very strong late game, and if they have very strong late game, they're usually going to pick defensive cards to fight for the board to get to that stage in the game. And it is easier to make a control deck. And the aggressive decks don't necessarily counter the control decks in Arena. It's a lot to do with card quality, and sometimes just being able to slow down your opponent a little bit more is going to counter their aggressive deck completely. So that doesn't really affect Warlock too much. If a game goes slower, they just tap more. So that really hasn't affected Warlock at all. That's just all positive. As far as Druid, they got Volcanic Lumber, which is their new top rare pick. There's no better rare than Volcanic Lumber available to Druid. Druid of Flame is a really solid card, way above average, just because it handles all those pesky creatures when you play it as a 2/5. It's very strong, and it just gets you to that later stage in the game. And not only are games slightly slower, but with these cards are able to even further slow down the game. And Druid's win condition was basically slow down the game until you play your big shit anyway. So Druids got quite a bit better as a result. Shaman's got the Fireguard Destroyer, but more importantly, again, they didn't really lose too much. Hunter's got Quick Shot, of course. Some Hunter decks are absolutely bonkers in Arena, and it really sucks for everyone else, but hey, that's what it is. Rogue's got the Dark Iron Skulker, which is their new best rare as well. And out of those classes, I'd actually rank like Mage, Paladin, Priest, and like Rogue as like the top classes before Blackrock Mountain. So out of those, I think Rogue's actually the only one out of the top bracket that really got buffed. And I'd say Rogue is probably decisively the third best behind Mage and Paladin. But you see, Mage, Priest, Paladin, Warrior, I think got worse than they previously were. And I think all this has to do is with saturated card pool. So what I mean is, all their good cards, except for Warrior, actually even Warrior has great common cards. All those classes just have really good common cards, and the commons that were added to the game, not just of their own class, but just everyone else's class, it just makes their deck worse. So it's less likely that when you play Mage, you'll have as many Flame Strikes, Fireballs, and Polymorphs as you did before. And the same is true for the very strong Paladin cards, the True Silvers, the Consecrates, the Blessing of Kings. The same is true for Priest. The same is true for Warrior. But unfortunately, for Warrior, as opposed to the other three classes, Warrior was already quite decisively the worst class in GVG, and I feel not only has Warrior suffered even more after this expansion, but I think they've actually suffered the most because they don't get anything. Like, they got no class cards, and it saturates the very few decent cards they already had. Just because Axeflinger, out of all the Blackrock cards, it's actually the worst one. I think Axeflinger is the single worst Arena card introduced, and it belongs to Warrior, who gained nothing. You get Grim Patron in Constructed, but you don't play combo decks in Arena. It's a different game. You play for value, you play for tempo, you play for mid game, you play the card value, you play the top deck war. But combo, no man, you need an unbelievable draft to do well with Warrior, and to do it with combo as well, good luck. So that's a little bit of a downer for Warrior players in Arena. Now, while Warrior loses, I feel overall Blackrock Mountain in Arena, again, hasn't changed things too much. Yes, Warlock gained a lot, and Druid, I think, gained quite a bit as well. But I think Warlock was, very close to Warrior in terms of strength pre-Blackrock Mountain, and Druid was, mid-range, something like that. Maybe Druid now is top tier. So it hasn't really thrown anything out of balance. It just made options a bit more attractive. Like, I think Arena might actually be in the best form of balance that I have seen it yet. So that's a good thing. Except for Warrior. Yeah. Man, every expansion, if you play a Warrior in Arena, you lose. How about that? Overall, not too much has shifted in Arena, but quite a few things have shifted in Constructed. I don't expect things to change too much from now on. There will be like this, the deck of the week, something like that. But the general big themes, the really big, the very powerful archetypes of the classes, I think are already out there, and we see quite clearly the type of game that Hearthstone is post Blackrock Mountain expansion. And I think, even though there are quite a few letdowns, overall, I think we did move the game in a positive direction. So that's a good thing, and it's pretty fun to look back and to see what players have to say. So I hope you guys enjoyed their opinion. I hope you guys have enjoyed mine, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.